Hi everyone and welcome back to SwitchUp and to the video where we try and damage our backlogs even further by adding some of the best sale games. Or the opposite of that, I'm sure it's one of the two. This week is looking cracking. There are some sales that I have never seen and there are some at their lowest ever prices. Firstly, congrats to the winner of the free game. Remember, we give away a free game each and every week. You just need to leave your comments and we choose someone. We also have 8 different games that we're giving away at the moment from the indie showcase style videos we did last week. So if you missed any of those, I'll pop links in the description. Alrighty, what are the best games on sale? Well, my name's Mark Walker. Welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. First up, we've got Tinything at 75% off. That takes it down to £5.39. That is, of course, the cheapest that one's ever been. And Tinything is an amazing game. Imagine like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids crossed with Pikmin, and you've got a pretty good idea of how this one plays out. The Tinything refer to the small little creatures that you have following you around, and you'll need set numbers of them to complete certain tasks. Now the game is played out over several levels and those are represented by the different bedrooms in the house, things like the kitchen, the front room, and they're brilliantly designed. There's just something really fun, I guess, about exploring in these environments, moving around where you see giant skateboards or making your way up to the door handle. There's lots of different side activity that you can carry out as well, rather than just the main mission, but you're generally trying to find different components to make a certain something. I won't spoil it because it would literally ruin the game. And that gives it a real sense of focus. So £5.39, 75% off. That goes on until September the 25th, and as I say, the cheapest that one's ever been.
This episode was sponsored by the absolutely delightful Selfloss. It's published by Merge Games and comes from a developer called Goodwin Games. We played this at Gamescom, and within 5 seconds of playing I knew it was going to be a complete hit. It's an emotional adventure game set in the Slavic-inspired whale-worshipping fantasy that proliferates this unusual land. The main character has a magical staff, they're called Casimir, and you're battling enemies that are infected by what's known as the miasma, and sailing from island to island on that little boat. Now I cannot tell you, some games you play and you're like, okay, that's all right, and then there are others where you know it's a little bit special, and this is one of those. We've seen a few games like this from Merge, where they've managed to select something that just feels a little bit special. Now, the developer himself does tackle some pretty heavy themes throughout the narrative, but it's not completely on the nose. And the Selfloss ritual itself is basically about healing the wounds of those who have lost loved ones. An incredible soundtrack as well. This one, as I say, really do keep your eye on it. All the information's at the bottom of your screen, as you can see, and just a massive thanks to Merge Games for sponsoring this episode.
Next up, we've got Sea of Solitude, the director's cut. That's down 75% to its lowest ever price. Another that I reviewed on the channel, and a very enjoyable, if a little unusual adventure. Has a bit of walking sim about it. Now it's published by Quantic Dreams. We all know the kinds of games they make, but it's developed by Joe Mai. And you're essentially guiding Kay and her little boat through a series of monstrous nightmares. It's an action adventure game, and it's actually Kay who believes that she is becoming the monster. It's about facing fears and doubts, but it does it in a very artistic way that works well, while still managing to feel like a game. You know how often these things can turn into just pieces of art with no game in them, really. This one skirts that line quite nicely, and as I say, it's the cheapest it's ever been. That sale goes on until September the 24th. Both of the ORI games are on sale, so you've got the Will of the Wisps and the Blind Forest. They're 60% off respectively. The Blind Forest being the first game is just £5.99 and the Will of the Wisps £9.99. But I think they're universally accepted as some of the best Metroidvanias on any platform, even rivaling Hollow Knight for some people. And I can see why. They tell an amazing story without having to bog the game down with tons of waffle. They look incredible, even the Switch versions. And in terms of level design and general concept, they're just excellent games. Both of those we have full reviews of, so go check them out if you're interested. Those sales go on until September the 26th and 27th respectively. Ys Origin is a slightly different take on the Ys formula from what you might be used to, but it's a very good game. Now it's down to £5.39, that's 70% off. And they're like dungeon crawlers within this tower, but they have quite a tight storyline. You've got 3 different playable characters, each with their own skill set, and there are also 4 different game modes. So you've got story mode, which is your standard dungeon crawler action RPG feel, but then you have things like time attack and arena mode, as well as speedrun mode, that once you've got to grips with the quite excellent combat, you may want to dive into. Now these are relatively short, about 10 to 15 hours. I very much enjoyed it, even though it was very different to my previous Ease game before this, at the time at least, which was Ease 8, but it makes up one of the 957 Ease games we've got, and it is a worthy addition. It's just £5.39, 70% off until September the 22nd. Now, definitely not what I would say is just a kids game at all. It's Lego Brick Tales, but it does constitute our kids pick this week because my son's really gotten into Lego. He absolutely loves it and he enjoys this game a lot. Now, this is finally down to what I would say is a real pick-up price. It's 70% off, the cheapest it's ever been. It's down to £7.49. And there's a full storyline here based around your grandfather, who was a genius inventor who wants your help, and you're trying to repair essentially the amusement park that he created. It takes you across several different locations. It does look very nice indeed, and of course you get to create your own minifigure, which is something that kids and adults love doing, but it will certainly test your brain as well. Good game this for all ages. It's just 966 megs, and that sale goes on until September the 20th. Now, while The Witcher 3 is on sale, I'm actually not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about Thronebreaker, The Witcher Tales. Not easy for me to say. But this one basically focuses on the Gwent game that you play in the Witcher series and makes that the intrinsic mechanic, I guess, to the adventure. On the one hand, you have this isometric perspective where you're moving around almost like an old school tabletop game or an RPG. You've got a little base camp and all of that. You're making different decisions, talking to various individuals, but then on the other, you're using the Gwent mechanics in place, I guess, of standard combat, and it works brilliantly. It's completely standalone to the Witcher series, but obviously you will see characters and locations from that game, or games I should say, and at the moment it is matching its cheapest, which I haven't seen in a while. It's down 60% until September the 22nd. You know what I'm going to say? Yes, there's a review on the channel if you want to go and find out more, but Thronebreaker, The Witcher Tales is certainly one I would consider, and weirdly, for the size of the franchise, it's almost a bit of a hidden gem. A game that we've played but we hadn't actually talked about, I don't think, on the channel at all, is Steamworld Build. This is down to, well, half price, down to £12.49, and it takes the Steamworld genre in a completely different direction, which is something we have seen a couple of times now, but this moves it into the strategy genre. Now, interestingly, I do actually know, I can't tell you how, but I know, that this game was being developed and it wasn't anything to do with Steamworld. So behind the scenes, there was a strategy game being made. Everyone was like, hey, this is decent. And then however it happened, I'm not entirely sure, but it then transitioned to becoming a Steam project, or a Steamworld project, I should say. And that's how we ended up with this quite unusual, I guess, take on the Steamworld genre. But it's brilliant. You're trying to manage that town. It's all inspired by the Old West. You have to meet the needs of the Steambots within it. Obviously finding and using different resources, trading as well. And there are 5 different distinct maps. Now, full disclaimer, I have only played probably an hour and 10 minutes of this one, not much at all. The reason it hasn't previously had a recommendation is because, in my opinion, for something that's a little more niche, still it uses Steamworld name, but it's a little more niche for most people, a sale is what you're going to be looking for, and at 50% off, this is an easy pickup. There have been updates since launch as well. It's just 907 megabytes. So yeah, Steamworld Build, 50% off. That goes on till the 20th of September. Another of my favourite Metroidvanias has to be Souldiers. This allows you to choose one of, I think it's 3 different classes at the beginning. They essentially amount to ranged, melee, and somewhere in the middle. But we first played this years and years ago, literally. It was an expo here in London, but unfortunately it had terrible load times, it had performance issues, it was a bit of a state. Now, they patched it up, I think they did 8 patches in the end, and eventually I would class it as good enough. Performance is generally fine. Some of the load transitions between larger areas, they still take longer than they should. So knowing that going in, I think you'll be okay, and certainly performance is a little worse towards the end of the game, but again, I still think it's good enough, especially at this lowest price. £8.99, 50% off. The core mechanics are brilliant, and each of those different classes genuinely feels very distinct from one another. If you're a Metroidvania fan and you've not picked this one up, you're looking at about 25 to 35 hours for a standard playthrough, and that sale, if you're interested, that goes on until September the 20th, and we do have a review of it. Personally, Koa and the Five Pirates of Mara is my favourite game within this universe. We've seen Chibig use this to try and make an RPG. They've more recently tried it again in a different format, but I loved the Five Pirates of Mara. It felt like an old school, well, I say old school now, but like a 3D Mario game, set around this archipelago where you ride around on your boat, sail around, and then visiting different islands. Essentially, they're the levels. What's cool is once you finish the standard level, you unlock this race mode and you're battling against other people. It has a few mechanics that make it feel a little more, I guess, than the sum of its parts. There's like a jump move you can do to go faster, and I just enjoyed it. It's not the longest, so if you're after a very long experience, you could potentially finish this in about 3 to 5 hours. But it was one of those where there was nothing about it I didn't like, really. A couple of little quirks, but generally what I want out of a platformer it had, I guess, except for the longevity. But then there is about 5 to 8 hours of content if you want to go and find everything and upgrade your boat and do all the little bits and bobs. I really enjoyed this. And you know what I'm going to say, there is a video if you want to go check out more and see what the final score was. It also might be a decent time to pick up a couple of other games that we've mentioned over the months. Things like Born of Bread, which is down 55% to its cheapest ever price. They've taken ideas from things like Paper Mario, haven't they? You play as a character who is quite literally born of the head chef's bread. Pops out of the oven at the start of the game. It's all very unusual, but it has that 2.5D style that we've seen used quite often now, but it just looks effective, doesn't it? It's got that semi-real-time turn-based combat, so there are actions you press at just the right moment to do more damage. Again, very Paper Mario inspired, and it's decent. I wouldn't say it's a classic, like it never really fully hits its stride in terms of the narrative, but I think the overall mechanics and things work well enough that it is an experience that feels worthwhile when you finish it. Born of Bread, as I say, down 55% to £12.14 until September the 20th. That's the cheapest it's ever been. That then leaves our Savaloys Selection, and I know some of you actually skipped straight to this part because the bank account is looking a little, not as full as it once was, and this is just a nice place to find some decent pickups. I'm going to start then with Rogue Aces. This might not look like it, but my goodness is this game addictive. It's 80% off. I think it was either the first or second game from Infinite State Games, and it's just massively enjoyable. It's like an old school arcade game. You take off as a plane, you've got little objectives to carry out, you can re-land to heal yourself. It might not look it, but yeah, we met the guys behind this right when we started the channel, and it's brilliant. It's a very, very fun game. Islanders, a very relaxing, slow-paced island builder where you gradually add new items, get more, and proximity and location's important, and as you unlock them, you unlock larger ones by placing them. There's that constant flow. As I say, a relaxing one. Little Dragon's Cafe at £2.24 is crazy. That's down 95%. As the title suggests, you're running a cafe and you've got a little dragon that you have to raise. The only thing is the load times take quite a bit, but good game for that price. The Last Campfire is down 90%, just over £1, £1.34, yes please. That's an absolute bargain. Great game, comes from Hello Games, so you have an idea of the pedigree at this point, but something totally different. Warp Shift is a very cool little unique puzzle game with a 3D perspective. You have to alter the mazes to open up new paths. There's no timer, nothing ticking down. It's about just taking your time, I guess in the same way as you might sit and try and figure out a Rubik's Cube. Good one, 85% off. And then finally, Children of the Zodiacs, that's down 88%. It's like a strategy board game RPG with part dice-based combat, but don't let that put you off. It has cards in there as well, and you're trying to build better decks. In that regard, it has that addictive quality that you'll find in many of my favourite games. But each party member's skills are basically bound to those cards, and there are a lot of different strategies you can take on. Good game, and a bit of a hidden gem, which takes us to the end of this week's video. Now, I do want to add in one game you should avoid, because I saw it pop up right at the top of the sales list, and it's the Guardians of the Galaxy game on Switch, which isn't on Switch, because it's a cloud version, but I honestly think some people just kind of see it pop up, they make that instant purchase, so excited, and then they realise that you've basically got to be sat on Bowser's shoulders for the game to run properly, and that's just not going to happen. Even with my internet, which is pretty decent, it doesn't work properly half the time. So yeah, unless you're very lucky, I would just avoid the cloud games on Switch. So that's it. Thank you to our Patreons and members, all of you that enjoy the content. And as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!